Hi, this is Frank, and welcome back to The Next Realignment. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the left-right political spectrum, and more specifically, why it doesn't actually exist. Before we get too much deeper into the history of American political party systems, it's worth taking a minute to discuss a notion that a lot of us have in our heads that's very, very common about how parties work, and that is this idea of the left-right political spectrum. See, many of us have picked up or learned at some point in our lives that American political ideas, or really the political ideas anywhere, exist in a neat line running from left to right, and that politics is about finding a position somewhere on this spectrum, and that parties represent points on this spectrum, and that politics is about pulling back and forth with certain people on the left and some on the right, and then those in the middle as centrists in the middle of this line. But here's the problem. That left-right spectrum, it doesn't actually exist, because we can't actually put all of the issues that exist in the world into some neat line. And many have tried, but nobody has figured out what it is or what criteria it would be that we would define something as left and right in the first place. And if we don't know how to define something as left and right, we certainly can't say something is more left or more right or in the center of 2 points that don't actually exist. And if we don't know what it means to call something left or right and how to even define it, then how can we line everything up using that parameter into a line? And if we can't line everything up into a line, well, then the whole framework falls apart. What does it even mean to pull things further left and further right? Directions that we don't even know what they are. And what does it mean to call something in the center or a centrist? The center of 2 poles that we can't even define in the first place. So where do we get this idea from? We got it, strangely enough, from seating arrangements in the French Revolution. As the French Revolution started picking up steam, and eventually the king lost his authority, the people created their new legislature, which is now becoming the new government of France. And as they sit down, their first big question they have to deal with, and the question looming across all of society in France at the time was, what do we do with the king? What is this new government we're creating? See, some people, they wanted to make a constitutional monarchy. They thought they could take the lessons of places like England, they could keep the king in place, and that they could institute sort of a new constitution and rules and parliament to build a better society than the absolute rule of the king before. Now, other people disagreed. They wanted a republic, and a full republic of the people. And what they were going to do was they were going to get rid of the king and start from scratch. So as this debate took off, for no reason other than mere historical accident, the people that we call the people who wanted to keep the king sat on the right side of the meeting hall. And the people that wanted to get rid of the king, they sat on the left side of the meeting hall. And these 2 names were born. We now had the left and the right. And those terms basically described the big dispute, not just then at that moment in France, but the next 100 years of history. Because the big issue of cross societies in the West was going to be that. What did we want to do? Do we want to have nobles and monarchs and kings and traditional authority, or did we want to build a new world of republics? So as shorthand, people got into the habit of calling these 2 groups the left and the right. And they were useful terms because they sort of succinctly summed up what the fight was that people were having at that moment in time and place. And then the names kind of stuck. And they stuck for a good reason. Because for probably the next 100 years across the West, this fight that they were having in the French Assembly Hall was the fight of politics. And this fight went back and forth, and we started creating new governments and new parliaments. And those parliaments, they were democracies, so naturally they split the society into 2 groups. And as they did, we kept using these same terms that described the debate back in the French hall. Left and right. And the people we thought of as the left, they tended to attract people who were Enlightenment thinkers as well as a lot of the poor and the destitute who found themselves locked out of the old order and were hoping for something better. People on the right, you had people who had something to gain from traditional authority, who were doing well in the old system, the nobility and the clergy. And they had this fight for years and years and years. And eventually, over time, these terms, left and right, they just sort of seeped into our notion of politics. It became habit. But here's the problem. Over time, eventually, that debate got resolved. Because in modern politics, we're not talking about republics and kings anymore, right? We still have a left and a right, but pretty much everybody today agrees that we want a republic. Nobody today on the left or the right in any Republican democracy really wants to go back to a monarchy and a king. But yet, because these names stuck, we continue to use them. Because over time, while new issues showed up and the ideas that once made sense faded away, we kept using the same names over time and just created new meanings for them. As you started getting into the 20th century, that old debate over monarchs and kings was no longer relevant. Kings were gone. We had basically, the republic had won and new societies were republican societies. And you had all these new problems that had entered into the new divisions of politics. Not only that, you had completely new ideas. You had things like communism and fascism, completely new ways to organize a society that were neither the republic nor the monarchy. So people kept trying to find ways to shoehorn all the new ideas into the framework that they knew. They had these new systems of government, these new issues of politics, and they started jamming them in to match them with, well, if the people that we're accustomed to thinking of as the left support them, these ideas are left. And if these people who we normally call the right, if they support them, then these ideas are now right. And ever since, that is all those terms have meant. When we talk about left and right, we don't have any intellectual way to really coherently describe what it is that makes something a left idea or a right idea. It is mere association. If we have two parties, we're going to use these names. We're going to call one left and one right just out of habit. It's a useful shorthand. So whatever they support, the left people support it, it's left. If the right people support it, it's right. People have done a lot of work and tried to develop ideas that maybe left and right, maybe they mean something more than that. And what I'll tell you is nobody has ever really succeeded at doing it. So what have they done? Well, some ideas, you try to take our connotations of the word or sort of our stereotypes of people as left and right. Maybe it is that people on the left are people who favor change. That seems to make sense. It seems to match our intuitions. But does it match reality? Well, no, right? The left people certainly like change that moves the country to the values and ideas that we naturally call left. And they don't like change that moves the country towards what the ideas and values we arbitrarily call right. And the right coalition's the same. People on the right like change as long as it moves the country right. And they don't like change if it moves the country left. So it's not just about change. Why, if you look at an issue, for example, entitlement reform? Well, we have these entitlement programs in the country. We've developed them decades and decades and decades. So where would we expect the parties to fall on the idea of radical reform of those systems, particularly reforms using untested ideas and free markets to yield different solutions? Well, here you find folks on the left, they look like stodgy traditionalists, right? They don't want to make any change to those systems. But people on the right, they want to do radical change. They want to do experiments and things that have never been tried before. So clearly, left and right can't just be about tolerance for change. Well, what are some other ideas? Well, some people think it has to do with moral intuition or our personalities. And there's truth to that, but only working backwards. See, there's definitely been a lot of studies that they're looking at, say, the big 5 personality traits, or Jonathan Haidt has done brilliant work about moral reasoning and how our personalities and our views of morality and the things that we value cause people, when presented with the two coalitions and parties that now exist, to choose one or the other. And that's definitely true. But the problem is, it doesn't work the other way. You can't actually use those rules and actually spit out reliably the parties as they actually exist today. You take a look at something like authority. It's traditionally said that people who have deference for authority were more likely to find themselves on the right. But not all the time. What if you say markets? Why wouldn't markets be something that the left liked, right? Why wouldn't the right, if they like authority, want strong state and a strong federal government with strong rules and powers, sort of centralizing authority? Why would they like the chaos of markets and unpredictability and bottom-up ideas? More than that, what do you do with the libertarians? Why are the libertarians in the right coalition? Shouldn't they be a radical part of the left coalition if the whole thing is about deference to authority? Or here's another one. What about the idea of sanctity? It's often said that folks on the right, they really have a lot of honor for the ideas of sanctity. And on many things, that's true. But what about the environment? Like, if you look at the arguments often made for the environment, they're arguments from purity, the purity of nature, that, Mother Earth needs to be protected. Well, why isn't environmentalism a radical right idea? Why would it possibly be part of the coalition of the left? There's no one of these rules that anyone's come up with. They work for certain things at certain times and places, but none of them can reliably split out the parties as they exist over all times and places. And of course that's true because the parties themselves and the coalitions themselves have changed many times over time. At different eras of history, the two coalitions, left and right, have believed completely different things. In different countries, sometimes the people we call left and right believe very different things. And then what do you do about, say, a country like China? Is it left or right? Well, it has a strong state. It has one-party rule, but it's also a capitalist market economy, but it calls itself communist. So is that a right or a left? Or is it something completely different, something independent on its own? The entire framework completely falls apart unless you can define it. And nobody has ever been able to define it. And of course, the entire notion, when you think about it, that there would even be a spectrum like this is kind of ridiculous. We all know the world is complicated. There's countless issues. They can be divided in all sorts of different ways. At certain different times and places in society, we've mixed and matched our issues differently. People that we know, sometimes they believe some of what one party and coalition believes, some of what the others. Things constantly change. And issues themselves, when the people we call left change their mind on something, issues can go from left to right. And when the people who we call right change their mind, issues can go from right to left. Why would we ever think it was reasonable that there would be a spectrum, a single spectrum of ideas to organize all of humanity and all of our myriad of thoughts and policies and ideas? Of course no spectrum like that exists. What is the left-right spectrum? It is nothing more than an arbitrary classification. We have two groups in society because we have a democracy. And the democracies with majority rule inevitably trend to two coalitions. And we got to give them names. And out of habit, going back a couple of hundred years, we have names in our pocket, left and right. And we stick one name on one coalition and the other name on the other coalition the best we can based on the associations in our mind. And whatever that group believes, that's what becomes left and right at that time in history. The left and right spectrum is just a metaphor run completely amok. And it has infected a lot of our thinking because the metaphor we've started to think it was true. See, we talk in terms of direction. We talk about left and right. So it draws a picture in a mind. And the picture it draws is one single line. And a line that can be tugged back and forth in two directions, left and right. And what's the most silly thing about that is the metaphor, it was never even developed about ideas. It was a metaphor about seating arrangements. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope you tune into the next episode because now we're about ready to get into history. We're going to start talking about the rise of America's first ever party system out of disagreements between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, the party system of the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists.